She had been walking through the outer tunnels of Verath 9, collecting mineral samples for her clinic, when the ground shook and a terrible screaming sound tore through the rock above her head like a knife through cloth. She dropped her basket and pressed herself against the tunnel wall as dust rained down from the ceiling, and the lights flickered twice before dying. When the shaking stopped, she waited in the darkness for a long time before she moved again. Katara was Mirathi, a small species, barely 4 feet tall, with 4 slender arms and skin that glowed faintly blue when she was afraid. Right now, she was glowing very bright indeed. Her people had no homeworld and no fleet and no voice in the Galactic Assembly. They survived by being useful and invisible, and by never ever making trouble. She should have gone back to her clinic. She should have sealed the door and waited for whatever was happening to be over. That was the smart thing to do. That was the Mirathi thing to do. But the smoke was coming from the canyon just beyond the outer vents, and it smelled like burning metal and something else, something organic, something alive. She went to look. The escape pod had carved a trench through the rocky ground before slamming into the canyon wall. It was cracked open like an egg, and flames licked from the split in its hull. Through the smoke, Katara could see a figure slumped inside the cockpit. Large, soft-skinned, 5-fingered. A human. Katara had never met a human before. She had heard stories, of course. Everyone in the galaxy had heard stories about humans. They were loud and stubborn, and fought wars over things that made no sense to anyone else. They were also supposedly very hard to kill. This one looked like he was dying. His name, she would learn later, was Lieutenant Commander Marcus Cole. He was 34 years old, and he had been on a solo courier mission carrying encrypted diplomatic files through the Verath corridor, when 3 Dravosi raider ships had torn his vessel apart. He had made it to the escape pod with 2 seconds to spare, and a piece of shrapnel the size of her hand buried in his side. Katara stared at him. She could see the blood, red, so much red, pooling beneath him and dripping onto the broken console. His breathing was shallow and wet, and each exhale made a bubbling sound that she recognized immediately as a punctured lung. She knew what she should do. She should walk away. The Dravosi controlled this colony, and they had a fragile peace agreement with Earth. If they found out a human was here, they would want him to disappear quietly. And if they found out that a Mirathi had helped him, they would make her disappear too. Katara looked at the dying human. Then she reached into the pod with all 4 arms and pulled him out. He was incredibly heavy. Humans were dense creatures, packed with muscle and bone, and this one was tall, nearly twice her height, across the rocky ground, leaving a trail of blood behind them, and she glowed so bright with fear that she lit up the canyon walls like a lantern. It took her 2 hours to get him back to her clinic. The clinic was not much, a carved-out chamber deep in the mining tunnels with a bed and a shelf of medicines and a single surgical light that buzzed and flickered. But it was hidden, and it was hers, and she had treated hundreds of miners here over the years for broken bones and infections and the slow radiation sickness that the Dravosi never bothered to protect their workers from. She laid Marcus on the bed and went to work. The shrapnel had to come out first. She used her smallest hands, the lower pair with their delicate fingers, to grip the metal while her upper hands held the wound open. It was ugly work, and the human made terrible sounds even while unconscious. She sealed the wound with Mirathi biogel, a living compound that bonded with damaged tissue, accelerated healing. Then she addressed the lung using a hollow needle fashioned from a mining drill bit to release the pressure in his chest. She worked for 9 hours straight. By the time she finished, the human was stable, but barely. His vital signs were weak and strange. Human biology was not her specialty, and she had to guess at half of what she was doing. But his breathing was no longer bubbling, and the bleeding had stopped, and his color, which had been a frightening gray, was slowly returning to something warmer. Katara sat on the floor beside the bed and shook. She shook for a long time. Her glow dimmed to almost nothing, which for a Marathi meant she was so exhausted that her body was shutting down non-essential functions. She should sleep. She should eat. Instead, she just sat there, watching the human breathe, and wondering what she had done. He woke on the third day. His eyes opened suddenly, brown and sharp, and immediately alert in a way that startled. He tried to sit up and gasped in pain, and she pushed him back down with 2 hands, while the other 2 checked his bandages. "Do not move," she said in broken common. "You are hurt badly." He stared at her. His eyes moved across her face, taking in her 4 arms, her faintly glowing skin, her small frame. Then he looked around the clinic, the rough stone walls, the flickering light, the shelf of crude medicines. "Where am I?" he asked. "Verath 9, she said. "Mining colony, lower tunnels. You crashed." "My ship?" "Gone. I found only the pod." He closed his eyes for a moment, and she watched something move across his face. Grief, anger, calculation, all in the space of a single breath. When he opened them again, the grief was gone, and only the calculation remained. "Who are you?" he asked. "Katara. I am a healer." "You saved my life." "Yes." He looked at her for a long time, and she did not understand the expression on his face. Not gratitude exactly. It was something heavier, something that looked almost like worry. "You should not have saved me," he said quietly. "If they find out, they will kill you." Katara turned away and began cleaning her instruments. She had already thought about this. She had thought about it for 3 days while she fought to keep him alive, and the answer she had arrived at was simple and sad and true. "Then they would have killed me for being useless eventually anyway," she said. Marcus said nothing, but she heard him shift on the bed, and when she turned back, he had pressed his hand against his collarbone, and his jaw was tight with concentration. She did not know it then, but beneath his skin a tiny device, a subdermal emergency beacon, had just sent a single quantum burst transmission, screaming across the stars at the speed of light. Far away, impossibly far away, in a place Katara could not even imagine, a red dot appeared on a screen aboard the carrier UNS Thermopylae. An intelligence officer leaned forward, and her coffee cup stopped halfway to her mouth. She set it down and pressed her comm. "Beacon confirmed," she said. "Cole is alive. Get me Admiral Vasquez." And just like that, the galaxy shifted. Admiral Elena Vasquez had not slept in 31 hours, and she had no intention of starting now. She stood at the center of the command deck aboard the UNS Thermopylae, with her hands clasped behind her back, and her eyes fixed on the holographic display that filled the air in front of her. The display showed a single red dot, pulsing on the edge of Dravasi space. Verath 9, a mining colony so far from anything important that most star charts did not even bother to name it. But the red dot meant that Lieutenant Commander Marcus Cole was alive on that rock, and that changed everything. Vasquez was 57 years old. She had fought in the border wars, the siege of Proxima, and the ugly little conflict at Kepler Station that nobody talked about anymore. She had buried friends, she had sent soldiers to die, and she had made peace with the cost of command a long time ago. But she had never, not once in her entire career, left someone behind. She was not about to. Start now. The intelligence officer, a young woman named Chen, stood beside her with a tablet full of data. "The beacon is genuine. Admiral Subdermal Model 7, implanted in all courier operatives. It transmitted a single burst before going dormant, which means Cole activated it manually. He is conscious and he is in danger." "What do we know about Verath 9? Vasquez asked. "Dravasi controlled mining operation, mostly slave labor drawn from displaced species, Marathi, Tassari, some Kulveen. The garrison is light, but the system has a patrol fleet of about 12 warships. And the beacon data, does it tell us anything about who helped him? Chen hesitated. The burst included a secondary tag, a biological signature that does not match any human profile. It appears that a local civilian, most likely Marathi, based on the bio readings, provided medical assistance. Vasquez nodded slowly. Something cold and precise was forming in her mind. Not anger exactly. Something very close to it. Someone on that rock pulled our man out of the fire. And now the Dravasi are going to hunt them both down. That is the most likely scenario. Yes. Vasquez turned away from the display and walked to her desk. She opened a drawer and pulled out a bound volume. Actual paper, actual ink, old enough that the edges had gone yellow. It was the original text of the Terran Compact, the foundational legal document of humanity's interstellar government. She had carried it with her on every posting for 20 years. She opened it to a page she had bookmarked long ago and read the words aloud. Article 7, the Law of Reciprocity. Any sapient being who renders life-saving aid to a citizen of Earth shall from that moment forward be considered under the full and permanent protection of the Terran Compact. An attack upon their person shall be regarded as an attack upon Earth itself, and shall be answered with all necessary force. Get me a secure channel to the Interstellar Security Council, she said. Emergency session, priority 1. The council session was held in the orbital chamber above Geneva, a circular room with transparent walls that looked down on the blue curve of Earth below. 23 representatives sat in a ring of floating chairs, and Admiral Vasquez stood at the center, like a woman standing before a firing squad, except she was the one holding the gun. She laid out the situation in plain language. Marcus Cole was alive on Varath 9. A Marathi civilian had saved his life. The Dravosi were almost certainly searching for both of them. Diplomatic channels would take weeks, and neither Marcus nor his rescuer had weeks. A senator from the Pacific Federation raised his hand. Admiral, the Dravosi hegemony controls 17 star systems. We control 8. Are you seriously proposing a military operation on their sovereign territory? I am, Vasquez said. A war. It could, but leaving our people to die will guarantee something worse. Another senator, an older woman from the European bloc, leaned forward. You said our people, Admiral. The alien healer is not a citizen of Earth. Vasquez smiled, and it was not a warm smile. She is now. Article 7 is not optional. It is not a suggestion. It is the law. The moment that Marathi healer put her hands on Marcus Cole and chose to save his life, she became one of ours, and we do not abandon our own. The room erupted. Senators argued and shouted and pointed fingers, and Vasquez stood in the middle of it all like a rock in a river, and waited. When the noise died down, she spoke again. I understand the risk. I am not asking you to be reckless. I am asking you to be human. We wrote Article 7 for a reason. We wrote it because we decided a long time ago that loyalty is not just something we feel. It is something we do. If we ignore that law now, then every species in this galaxy will know that human promises mean nothing, and that will cost us far more than a battle. The vote was close, 13-10. It passed. Vasquez was already walking out of the chamber before the last vote was counted. She had 47 warships to mobilize, and she intended to have them moving within 6 hours. On Varath 9, things were getting worse. The Dravosi enforcement squads had intensified their sweeps of the lower tunnels. They were not looking for Marcus specifically, not yet, but they had detected unusual energy signatures from the crash site, and they were methodical and thorough. It was only a matter of time. Marcus was on his feet now, though barely. The biogel had done remarkable work, and his wound was closing faster than Katara had expected, but he was still weak and in pain. None of that stopped him from working. Katara watched in stunned silence as the human who could barely walk 3 days ago began transforming her clinic into a fortress. He used mining tools to collapse secondary tunnel entrances, creating choke points. He rigged fuel canisters with chemical igniters, and placed them at key junctions. He fashioned a crude alarm system from wire and metal scraps that would rattle if anyone approached from the north corridor. "What are you doing?" Katara asked, though the answer was obvious. "Making it expensive for them to come in here," Marcus said. He was sweating and pale, and his hands trembled slightly, but his movements were precise and deliberate, like a man who had done this kind of work many times before. "You are still injured. You should be resting." He looked at her, and for a moment his hard expression softened. "I will rest when you are safe." Katara did not know what to say to that. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. The Marathi looked out for each other in quiet, desperate ways, sharing food, hiding the sick, whispering warnings, but no one had ever stood up, said, "I will fight for you." Not once in her entire life. Other Marathi began to appear. They came one by one, out of the deeper tunnels, miners and laborers and refugees who had heard through the network of whispers that something was happening in Katara's clinic. They came with wide eyes and trembling hands, and they stared at the human who was building barricades out of rock and metal and fury. An old Marathi man named Torvan approached Marcus. "Is it true?" he asked. "Are the humans coming for you?" Marcus paused his work. "I sent a signal. If anyone heard it, then yes, they are coming. And will they come for us too?" Marcus looked at Torvan, and then at Katara, and then at the dozen Marathis standing in the tunnel behind them, small and scared and glowing faintly in the darkness. "On Earth," he said, "we have a saying. You do not abandon the people who pulled you out of the fire. You burn the world down for them. Will come for all of us." Far above Varath 9, at the edge of the star system, a ripple tore through the fabric of space, and then another, and then another. 47 ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation, destroyers and frigates and cruisers arranged around the massive armored hull of the carrier UNS Thermopylae. On the bridge, Admiral Vasquez straightened her uniform and opened a broadcast channel to every frequency in the system. "This is Admiral Elena Vasquez of the United Nations Expeditionary Command aboard the UNS Thermopylae. We are here to collect our people." She paused and let the words hang in the silence of space. Overlord Kreth Vasan had ruled the Varath 9 garrison for 11 years, and in all that time, nothing interesting had ever happened. The colony existed for one purpose: to pull rare minerals from the rock and ship them back to the hegemony. The miners were disposable. The work was brutal. The profits were excellent. Kreth kept order with a light garrison and a heavy hand, and the galaxy left him alone. Until 47 human warships appeared at the edge of his system. Kreth stood on the bridge of his command ship, the Fang of Dravasar, and stared at the tactical display as if it had personally insulted him. The human fleet was arranged in a crescent formation, an aggressive posture, not defensive, and the lead vessel was broadcasting on every open channel, with a message so blunt that his communications officer had to read it twice to make sure it was not a translation error. "They say they are here to collect their people, Overlord. All of them." Rippled with irritation. He was Travosi, tall, armored in natural plating, with teeth designed for tearing and eyes built for darkness. His species had conquered 17 star systems through patience and brutality, and they did not flinch at threats from soft-skinned mammals. "Contact the Hegemony High Council," he ordered. "Inform them of the human presence and request instructions." The response came quickly. "Stand firm. The humans will not fire first. They never do." Kreth believed this. He had studied human military history, or at least the summaries his intelligence officers had prepared. And he knew that humans preferred diplomacy and posturing and long negotiations before committing to violence. They were emotional creatures, ruled by sentiment, and that made them predictable. He was wrong about that, but he would not discover how wrong for several more hours. Aboard the Thermopylae, Admiral Vasquez studied the same tactical display from the other side. See the Dravosi Patrol Fleet, 12 warships, plus Kret's command vessel, holding position between her fleet and the planet. They were not moving, which meant they were waiting for orders, which meant she had a window. "Deploy Halo teams," she said. "Electronic warfare cover full spectrum. Go now, before they decide to grow a spine." 3 dropships launched from the Thermopylae's belly. Small, fast, running with emissions so low, they were practically invisible against the background radiation of the system. Each carried a 12-person marine assault team, equipped for urban combat in confined spaces. The lead team was Halo 1, and its commander was Sergeant Major Yuki Tanaka. Tanaka was 40 years old, and she had been a Marine for 22 of those years. She had cybernetic enhancements in both arms and her left eye. The left eye was a replacement after a Dravosi plasma round had taken the original during the Kepler station incident. She had volunteered for this mission within 30 seconds of hearing the briefing. When asked why, she had said simply, "The doc saved one of ours. I do not need another reason." The dropships entered the atmosphere on the dark side of the planet, using the bulk of a mountain range to mask their approach. They touched down in a dry canyon, 6 kilometers from the colony, and the Marines moved on foot through the mining tunnels, using maps that UNEC intelligence had pulled from commercial databases. Tanaka led from the front. Her cybernetic eyes switched to thermal imaging, and she moved through the darkness like a ghost, fast and silent and utterly focused. Her team followed in a single file, each Marine covering a different angle, each one carrying enough firepower to level a city block. They encountered their first Dravosi patrol 20 minutes in. 4 soldiers, reptilian, armed with plasma rifles, moving casually through a junction, as if they owned the place, which technically they did. Raised her fist and her team froze. She studied the patrol for 3 seconds, then made 2 hand signals. It was over in 4 seconds. The Marines used suppressed kinetic rounds, and the Dravosi dropped without making a sound. Tanaka stepped over the bodies and kept moving. Deep in the tunnels, Marcus heard the shooting start. Not Tanaka's team, that was still too far away. This was the Dravosi enforcement squads who had finally traced the energy signatures to Katara's clinic. They came from the South Corridor, 8 soldiers in heavy armor, and they came fast. Marcus was ready. The first 2 soldiers hit the tripwire he had strung across the corridor, and the fuel canister he had rigged to it detonated with a roar that shook the tunnel walls. The blast did not kill them. Dravosi armor was tough, but it threw them backward and filled the corridor with choking black smoke. Marcus fired from behind a barricade of stacked ore crates, using a mining laser he had modified to operate in short, focused bursts. The weapon was not designed for combat, but at close range it punched through Dravosi armor like paper. He dropped 2 soldiers before they could return fire. The remaining 6 took cover and began advancing by sections, professional and coordinated, and very angry. Katara crouched behind Marcus with her 4 hands pressed over her ears. The sound was deafening, and the flashes of plasma fire lit the tunnel in strobes of blinding green. She had never experienced violence like this. The raw, screaming chaos of it, the smell of burning metal and scorched flesh, the way the walls vibrated with each impact. But she did not freeze. When Marcus took a plasma graze across his shoulder, the same shoulder she had spent 3 days healing, she pulled him back behind cover and slapped a fresh layer of biogel onto the wound before he could protest. Then she grabbed a canister of medical-grade chemical compound from her shelf and hurled it into the corridor, where it burst and released a cloud of dense white vapor that burned Dravosi eyes, but left human and Marathi vision unaffected. Marcus stared at her. "What was that?" "Antiseptic vapor," she said. "Very concentrated, very painful for reptilian species." He almost laughed. The Dravosi fell back to regroup, and Marcus used the pause to collapse a section of tunnel ceiling behind them, sealing off the south approach. But he knew it was temporary. They would come from another direction soon, and he was running out of fuel canisters, and his shoulder was bleeding again, and the mining laser was overheating. Then he heard something on the north corridor. Footsteps, fast and precise, and utterly unlike the heavy stomping of Dravosi boots. These were human footsteps. "Lieutenant Commander Cole," a voice called out, calm and professional and unmistakably military. "This is Sergeant Major Tanaka, Halo 1, United Nations Expeditionary Command. Confirm your position and status." Marcus let out a breath he did not realize he had been holding. Confirmed position is the medical clinic, Junction 774. Status is alive, thanks to a very brave healer. Tanaka's team appeared from the darkness, 12 Marines in matte black armor, moving like predators. They flowed into the clinic and secured every entrance in seconds with a practiced efficiency that made Marcus's improvised defenses look like a child's fort. Tanaka herself walked straight to Marcus and looked him over with her one real eye and one glowing cybernetic one. "You look terrible, sir. You should see the other guys." Then Tanaka turned and saw Kitara. The Marathi healer was pressed against the back wall, trembling and glowing bright blue with fear. She barely came up to Tanaka's chest. She had blood on all 4 of her hands, Marcus's blood, and her eyes were wide and terrified. Tanaka did something that surprised everyone. Knelt down. She knelt so that she was at eye level with Kitara, and she removed her helmet so the healer could see her face, scarred and weathered and kind. "Ma'am," Tanaka said, "I am Sergeant Major Tanaka, United Nations Expeditionary Command. On behalf of Earth and every human who has ever been pulled from the edge of death by someone brave enough to help, thank you for saving our guy." Kitara stared at her. She was shaking so hard, her glow flickered. "We are taking you home," Tanaka said. "I do not have a home," Kitara whispered. Tanaka smiled, and it was the most genuine smile anyone in that tunnel had seen in a very long time. "You do now." In orbit, Overlord Kreth was growing impatient. His sensors had detected the dropships entering the atmosphere, too late to intercept them, but not too late to respond. He moved his fleet forward, placing his warships between the planet and the human formation. He opened a channel to the Thermopylae. "Admiral Vasquez, you have violated Dravazi sovereign space and deployed military forces to our territory. Withdraw immediately or face consequences." Vasquez's response was immediate and delivered in a voice so calm it was almost pleasant. "Overlord Kreth, the individual who saved my officer, is now a protected citizen of Earth under Article 7 of the Terran Compact. Your forces have threatened her life. You have 1 hour to withdraw from engagement range. After that, I will interpret your presence as an act of war, and I will respond accordingly." Kreth bared his teeth in what passed for a Dravazi laugh. "You would go to war over one insignificant creature, Admiral? One tiny healer who means nothing?" Vasquez's voice dropped to something cold and hard and final. "We went to war over a single Archduke once, Overlord. Imagine what we will do for someone who actually deserves it." The channel went dead. The hour passed. The Dravazi did not withdraw. Vasquez stood on her bridge, looked once at the blue-white marble of Verath 9 below, and gave the order. "All ships, weapons free." The Thermopylae fired. That was the thing about space combat that the war stories always got wrong. There was no sound. No roar of engines or thunder of cannons. Just light. Brilliant, terrible light, as kinetic rounds and plasma torpedoes streaked across the blackness and slammed into the Dravosi formation with a violence that was almost beautiful. Overlord Kreth had 12 warships, plus his command vessel. They were big and armored, and built for intimidation. The Dravosi philosophy of war was simple. Be larger than your enemy, and they will not fight. Admiral Vasquez had 47 ships. They were smaller and faster, and they fought like nothing the Dravosi had ever seen. The first exchange shattered Kreth's forward screen. 2 Dravosi destroyers, each one 3 times the mass of a human frigate, took concentrated fire from 6 human ships simultaneously. The humans did not spread their attacks. They focused everything on one target at a time, pouring fire into a single point until the armor broke, buckled, and the hull split open, and the atmosphere inside vented into space in a white cloud of freezing crystal. Then they moved to the next one. Kreth screamed orders. His ships returned fire, and the Dravosi plasma cannons were devastating. A single hit could gut a human frigate from bow to stern. The carrier Thermopylae took a glancing blow that peeled away a section of its port armor like skin from fruit. 3 human ships died in the first 10 minutes, consumed by green fire that left nothing but spinning wreckage. But the humans did not stop. They did not slow down. They did not retreat. Vasquez stood on her bridge surrounded by damage reports and casualty numbers, and she absorbed it all with the calm of a woman who had already counted the cost and decided to pay it. She watched her ships burn, and she gave the next order. Frigate Group 3 execute Gambit 7, use the asteroid field. 3 frigates broke formation and dove into the dense ring of mining asteroids that orbited Verath 9. The Dravosi sensors lost them in the clutter of rock and metal. Then the asteroids started moving. The humans had attached thruster packs to 6 massive chunks of iron-rich rock, each one the size of a city block, and aimed them at the Dravosi formation. The asteroids had no engine signatures, no energy readings, nothing for the Dravosi targeting systems to lock onto. They were just rocks. Rocks traveling at 12 kilometers per second. 2 of them hit. The first asteroid struck a Dravosi cruiser amidships and broke it in half like a toy. The second clipped the fang of Dravasar itself, tearing away its starboard weapons array and sending the command ship spinning. Kreth grabbed the railing of his bridge as the deck tilted beneath him. Alarms screamed in every direction, and his tactical display was a chaos of red warning symbols. His communications officer was shouting that 3 more ships had gone dark, and the human fleet was closing distance. They are insane, Kreth hissed. They are completely insane. He was not entirely wrong. Vasquez deployed her next trick. A formation of 12 drone ships running full electronic warfare suites that projected ghost signatures across the Dravosi sensors. Suddenly the 12 human ships looked like 60. The Dravosi gunners began firing at phantoms, wasting ammunition on targets that did not exist, while the real ships circled behind them. Then 3 human frigates did something that broke every rule of naval combat. They vented their own atmosphere. The ships went dark. No power, no heat, no emissions, and drifted toward the Dravosi line like dead hulks. The Dravosi sensors marked them as destroyed, and the boarding ships moved in to claim salvage, as was standard Dravosi practice. When the boarding ships were close enough to touch, the 3 frigates came alive. Their reactors fired at full power, and they detonated everything they had at point-blank range. The explosions lit up the void like new stars. 3 Dravosi boarding ships and 2 escort vessels vanished in a sphere of white fire that expanded and faded and left nothing behind. On the surface, the battle was just as savage. Tanaka's team fought a running extraction through the colony tunnels, carrying Marcus and Katara and the growing group of Marathi refugees who had attached themselves to the humans like children following a torch in the dark. The Dravosi had committed their full garrison now, over 200 soldiers pouring into the tunnels from every direction. Tanaka was magnificent. She moved through the corridors like water flowing downhill, always forward, always finding the path of least resistance, always killing with an efficiency that was almost mechanical. Her cybernetic arms gave her speed and strength that no unaugmented human could match, and she used both without hesitation. But the tunnels were a maze, and the Dravosi knew them better. The team got pinned at a junction, fire coming from 3 directions. No cover, no room to maneuver. Marcus grabbed a plasma rifle from a fallen Dravasi and fought beside the Marines, ignoring the blood seeping through his bandages and the pain that made his vision blur. It was Katara who saved them. She had been quiet during the fighting, pressed against the wall, shielding the Marathi children with her body, trying to make herself as small as possible. But when the team was pinned, she stepped forward and spoke. "There is a maintenance shaft behind this wall," she said. "It connects to the water processing plant, which has an exit to the surface. I have used it to smuggle medicine to the outer settlements. The Dravasi do not know about it." Tanaka looked at her. "You are sure?" Katara met her eyes, and her glow steadied to a calm, even blue. "I am sure. I have walked these tunnels for 9 years. I know every crack and every wall." The wall opened, and Katara led them through. She moved through the narrow shaft with confidence, her small frame perfectly suited to the tight space, her bioluminescence lighting the way for the humans who followed. She guided them past junctions and drops, and through sections so narrow that the Marines had to remove their armor plates to fit. Along the way they encountered wounded Dravasi, 3 soldiers trapped under collapsed rubble, injured and groaning. Tanaka's team moved to pass them, but Katara stopped. She knelt beside the closest one, a young Dravasi with a broken arm and fear in his slit-pupiled eyes, and she began to treat his injury. Marcus watched her. He watched this tiny 4-armed healer, who had survived 3 days of terror and firefights and explosions, kneel in the dirt and carefully set the broken bone of an enemy soldier who had been trying to kill them minutes ago. She applied biogel and fashioned a splint from a piece of metal, and she did it with precision, the same gentle precision she had used to save his life. "Why?" he asked. Katara did not look up. "Because he is hurt. He was trying to kill us." "Yes, and now he is hurt. Those are different things." Marcus stared at her, and something shifted inside him, something deep and fundamental that he would spend years trying to put into words. He had known brave people before. He had fought beside soldiers who would die for their comrades without hesitation. But this was something else entirely. This was a kind of courage that had nothing to do with fighting, a courage that refused to stop being kind even when the world was on fire. He said nothing. He just stood guard while she finished. Above them the battle in orbit was winding down. The Dravasi fleet was broken. 7 human ships had been destroyed, but 19 Dravasi vessels were gone, shattered or burning, or drifting dead in the void. Overlord Kreth, aboard his crippled command ship, finally gave the order to withdraw, and the remnants of his fleet limped toward the edge of the system, trailing fire and debris. The galaxy watched. News of the Battle of Vareth 9 spread at the speed of light, carried by 1,000 communication relays and news drones and diplomatic channels. Species on 100 worlds saw the footage. Human warships burning in the void, Marines fighting through tunnels, a tiny glowing healer leading refugees to safety. And everywhere the same question was asked. The humans went to war for one alien healer. They sent 47 warships and lost 7 of them, and killed hundreds of Dravasi soldiers, for one person. The Tasari ambassadors on 3 different worlds sent quiet messages to Earth's diplomatic corps. The Kulveen trade guilds opened back-channel communications. The Andari, who had not spoken to any major power in 50 years, transmitted a single word on an encrypted frequency. Interested. If Earth protects those who help humans, then perhaps it was time to start helping humans. Aboard the extraction dropship rising through the atmosphere with plasma fire streaking past the hull, Katara sat, strapped into a seat designed for someone twice her size. She looked out the small viewport and saw the Dravasi warships burning above her, great metal beasts torn open and dying, surrounded by clouds of debris that caught the light of the distant sun. She turned to Marcus, who sat beside her, bleeding and exhausted, and still holding his weapon. "All this," she whispered, "because I bandaged your wounds." Marcus looked at her, and his expression was tired and sad and fierce, all at the same time. "No," he said, "all this because you decided we were worth saving, and now we have decided the same about you." Katara looked back at the burning sky and said nothing. But her glow turned warm gold for the first time since Marcus had known her. Not about the battle itself, though the military analysts had written thousands of reports, dissecting every maneuver and every mistake, and every moment where the outcome could have gone the other way. What the galaxy could not stop talking about was the reason for it. One healer, one small four-armed alien who had pulled a bleeding human out of a burning pod, and the entire might of Earth's fleet had come screaming across the stars to bring her home. For a galaxy that had operated for centuries on the principle that the strong take and the weak endure, this was not just surprising, it was terrifying. The Dravasi hegemony felt that terror most acutely. The High Council had expected the conflict to end with a quiet diplomatic settlement. Some prisoners exchanged, some trade concessions made, the usual machinery of interstellar politics grinding along as it always had. Instead, they found themselves facing something they had never encountered before: consequences. Earth did not negotiate alone. Within weeks of the battle, a coalition began to form, not through grand speeches or formal treaties, but through dozens of small, quiet acts of solidarity. The Tesserae opened their shipyards to human vessels for repair and resupply. The Kulveen trade guilds rerouted their shipping lanes to bypass Dravosi checkpoints. The Ondari, a reclusive species of deep space navigators who had avoided galactic politics for half a century, began sharing their star charts with UNEC intelligence. Each of these species had suffered under Dravosi exploitation for generations. Each had been too small and too weak and too alone to resist. But Earth had shown them something new, that someone would actually fight for the little ones. That protection was not just a word in a treaty, but a promise backed by blood and fire. The Dravosi High Council fractured. Hawks demanded a full military mobilization to crush Earth before the coalition could solidify. Moderates argued that the numbers did not add up. Earth had 8 systems, but humans reproduced fast and fought harder than any species the hegemony had ever encountered. A full war would not be the swift conquest the Hawks imagined. It would be a grinding, bleeding catastrophe that could take decades and cost millions of Dravosi lives. The moderates won, barely. A ceasefire was signed. The Dravosi withdrew from 3 contested systems, including Vareth 9. They released hundreds of enslaved workers from the mining colonies. Economic sanctions organized by the growing coalition bit deep into hegemony trade revenues. It was not justice, not yet, not fully, but it was a beginning. On Earth, Katara became the most famous alien in human history. She did not want this. She was a healer, not a symbol. But her image, small and four-armed and glowing softly in the darkness of the tunnels, had been captured by a Marine's helmet camera during the extraction. Spread across every news network on every human world within hours. People saw the footage of her treating the wounded Dravosi soldier, the enemy who had been trying to kill her friends. And something in that image struck a nerve so deep that it became the defining moment of the entire conflict. Not the battle in orbit, not the Marines fighting through the tunnels, not even Vasquez's famous line about the Archduke. It was the healer kneeling in the dirt, setting a broken bone because he was hurt. And that was enough. Earth granted Katara full citizenship in a ceremony broadcast live to 8 billion people. She stood on a stage in Geneva, tiny among the tall humans in their formal uniforms, and accepted the document with 2 hands while the other 2 hung at her sides trembling. She tried to give a speech, but her voice broke after 3 words, and she simply bowed, and the crowd erupted in a sound she had never heard before. Applause. 8 billion humans clapping for her. Mirathi healer, who had done nothing more and nothing less than what healers do. But Earth did not stop there. The Terran Compact authorized the allocation of a garden world, a planet designated Elysium 3 in the catalog, but which everyone would soon call New Mirath. It was a beautiful world, with wide green valleys, and clean rivers, and skies so blue they hurt to look at. It was offered to the Mirathi diaspora as a permanent homeland, the first they had possessed in living memory. The news reached Mirathi communities scattered across dozens of worlds, and the reaction was something between disbelief and grief and overwhelming joy. Families who had lived in mining camps and refugee stations for 3 generations packed their belongings and boarded transport ships, heading for a planet they had never seen, but that was already somehow home. Kitara was offered a leadership role in the new colony. She declined. "I am a healer," she told the human officials who made the offer. "I do not know how to lead a world. I know how to fix what is broken." Instead, she founded the Marathi Institute of Healing, a medical school and research center built on the outskirts of the colony's first city. It was funded jointly by the Terran Compact and donations from species across the galaxy, and within its first year, it enrolled students from 23 different worlds. Kitara taught them all the same thing, that healing was not a profession, but a principle, that you did not ask who someone was or what they had done before you helped them, that the hand that reaches out is always stronger than the fist that strikes. Marcus Cole recovered fully from his injuries. He was promoted to commander and offered his choice of postings. He chose to serve as Earth's permanent military attaché to New Mirath, a post that most career officers would have considered a dead end, but that Marcus requested specifically and without hesitation. Officer asked why he wanted to be stationed on a small colony world with no strategic significance. Marcus had smiled. "That colony exists because one person decided to be brave," he said. "I would like to make sure her bravery was not wasted." He and Kitara developed a friendship that was quiet and deep, and built on the kind of understanding that only comes from having survived something terrible together. They did not talk about the tunnels often. They did not need to. Sometimes Marcus would visit her clinic in the evening, and they would sit on the balcony and watch the sunset over the valley, and say nothing at all. And that was enough. At the Galactic Assembly, the sprawling diplomatic congress, where representatives of hundreds of species gathered to argue and posture and occasionally accomplish something, Earth's ambassador presented a formal expansion of Article 7. It was called the Kitara Doctrine. The language was simple. Any species or individual that extends aid to a citizen of the Terran Compact or its allied nations shall automatically receive the full protection of the Compact and all its signatories. Any act of aggression against such individuals shall be treated as an act of aggression against Earth and every member of the Alliance, and shall be met with unified response. It was not just a human law anymore. It was a galactic one. Dozens of species signed on immediately. The Tessari were first, then the Kulveen, then the Andari, then species that had never allied with anyone before, the Verath mining communities, the Selthari navigators, even a handful of Dravazi dissidents who had seen what the hegemony had become and wanted no part of it. The old galactic order, where the powerful preyed on the weak, and no one intervened because intervention was expensive and the weak were not worth the cost, did not collapse overnight, but it cracked, and through those cracks something new began to grow, a lot like hope. In the final days of the first year of the colony, Kitara stood on the balcony of her clinic and watched Marathi children play in a garden. She had never seen Marathi children play in a garden before. In the mining colonies there had been no gardens. In the refugee stations there had been no space to play. These children had been born on New Mirath, the first generation of Marathi to know what it felt like to have ground beneath their feet that belonged to them. A shuttle landed on the clinic's small landing pad, and Admiral Elena Vasquez stepped out. She looked older than the last time Kitara had seen her. The 6 months since the battle had added lines to her face that had not been there before. But her eyes were the same, sharp and steady and carrying a weight that Katara recognized because she carried it too. Vasquez walked to the balcony and stood beside Katara, and for a moment they both watched the children. Then, Vasquez opened a small case and presented Katara with a medal, Earth's highest civilian honor, the Solar Cross, awarded for extraordinary courage in service of humanity. "The galaxy kept telling us that kindness is weakness," Vasquez said, "that saving one person does not matter, that the smart thing is to look away and protect yourself. You proved them all wrong." Katara looked at the medal in her hands. It was heavy for such a small thing. She turned it over and saw her own name engraved on the back, in both human standard and Marathi script. She looked at the children in the garden. Then she looked at the Admiral. Her bioluminescence pulsed warm gold, steady and bright and unafraid. "I did not prove anything," Katara said. "I just did what healers do. You humans are the ones who turned it into a revolution." Vasquez smiled. "That is what we do. Someone shows us kindness, and we make sure the whole galaxy knows that kindness is never free. It is always, always repaid." Together on the balcony, as the sun sank below the mountains, and the valley filled with golden light, and the sound of children laughing drifted up from the garden below. That evening, a transmission went out on every frequency in every system, broadcast by human relay stations and Tesserae communication hubs, and on Dari deep space beacons, carried to every corner of the galaxy by a network that had not existed 6 months ago. The message was simple. "Attention all species. This is a public service announcement from the Terran Compact and its allied nations. If you have saved a human life, do not be alarmed. You are now under our protection, and to anyone who would threaten you, we suggest you reconsider. Earth remembers its debts, and we always pay in full."